Thank you. And in the spirit of being the youth pastor, I'm going to do what I always do Sundays. Everyone gather together. Let's get in the same section. I'm just kidding. Nobody moved, so I'm glad you knew I was joking. But also, and I wouldn't be a youth pastor if I didn't do a shameless plug for our high school youth ministry. We have meets Sunday nights, 5:30 to 7:30. I see some of you in here that go to that. Then also, we do have a winter camp coming up January 17th through the 20th. If you're a high school, we'd love to invite you to attend that. If you're not a high schooler, you can't attend. But if you'd love to partner with a student and go above and beyond your normal tithing and maybe sponsor a student, I'd love to chat with you about that after the service. We're going to be in Luke 15, 11 through 32. This is the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. So let's go ahead and read together. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. Who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field when he came near the house. He heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he said. He replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes in home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me and everything I have is yours.' But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Let's pray real quick before we get into it. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to dive into your word, to learn, to gain new understanding of you, your heart for us and for those around us, God. I pray that we would be open and receptive to whatever it is that you would will for us to hear this Sunday. We pray all these things in your name. Amen. Anybody like me in here has ever done the fake running away, maybe to influence mom or dad to get you something? Anybody in here? Nobody? Nobody's brave enough to raise their hand? So I'm going to tell on myself a little bit. 7th grade. By the way, I was a runawayer if there ever was one. I used to say, I'm going to run away, and my mom would always play alongside and say, okay, where do you want to live? I'll get a reservation for you. Let's get this, orderly. Let's do it the right way. She was joking. She would never do that. I don't want anyone to think that she would actually send a little kid out somewhere on his own. But I did the whole 9. I wrote a long, heartfelt letter about why I was moving away, why I had to go off and nobody loved me, this, that, and the other. And then I left my note perfectly on my pillow. I packed my bag of all the essentials, toys, and, no underwear probably. And then I got as far as the window. I climbed through the window in our house on the 2nd floor. You could go through the window onto the roof. So I was as brave to go on the roof. And then I decided that I wasn't going to run away, but I wanted to stay on the roof to show them what it was like to live without me in the house. So I had been up there for a little while, and then eventually my dad comes driving home. By the way, my parents are here, so if you see me looking at 2 people while I'm talking, that's because those are my parents. You can clap for them, yeah. They had a labor in vain for many years dealing with me. Not in vain, sorry. But so anyway, I saw my dad coming in the distance. I could see him on the street driving home from work. And so I ran to the back half of the angled roof so he couldn't see me just lounging on the front side of the roof that faced the front yard. And I was peeking over, making sure he wouldn't see me. I hear the garage door open and close, and then him go inside and shut the garage door into the kitchen. And he always wore a suit and tie and dress shoes to work every day. So I even remember hearing the click of his dress shoes on our kitchen floor walking around. And it was quiet for a little bit, and then I see him go back out. And he's going back out, and in my 7th grade head, I was like, oh, he's so concerned for me. He's looking for me. He wants me to be safe and sound, which I'm sure was a thought he had, but not the thought that he had, just some more gritting his teeth. And I just got home from work, and I'm hungry and tired and don't want to have to deal with this kid who's ran away already 12 times and not really ran away. Well, I'm going to share something with you that went a little viral to kind of let you know how it ended up, maybe a little bit. So you see this picture. I don't know if anyone saw this, but this is trending on Twitter, and it says, does someone have any extra club soda? Just to get out the stains, because the kid got into something that they shouldn't have gotten into. And then somebody responded to this tweet with another picture, and it showed a belt with club soda on it. So I got some club soda that day, and it wasn't the good kind, we'll say that. There's a man named Dr. Bailey, Dr. Kenneth Bailey, and he was a professor and teacher and theologian, and he spent a majority of his career in the Middle East. He spent 40 years studying in the Middle East, and he actually opened up a New Testament theology school in the Middle East, and his main focus was learning the context of the people that Jesus was talking to at the time that he was talking to them. And he's written many books, and one of the books that I'm going to be pulling from today is called The Cross and the Prodigal Son, Luke 15, through the eyes of a Middle Eastern peasant. Now, we all know the story of the prodigal son, and maybe some of us don't, and so we're listening for the first time, but when you hear of a son asking for his inheritance early and going off and squandering it and coming back, that's not a new story, nor is it an old story. You hear it all the time of, people going off and thinking they're going to accomplish great things and then get, maybe they go to Vegas or they go to the big city and they get caught up with the wrong crowd and they make a couple wrong decisions. But as Jesus is painting this picture with this parable that he's telling, I think it might be a little difficult for us in the 21st century to pick up some of the small, detailed brushstrokes of this beautiful portrait that he's painting. Specifically, when the son is asking for his inheritance, what do you think he's communicating there? Usually you only get an inheritance when the father has passed away. So the son's saying, Dad, you're taking too long. Hurry up and die already. He's communicating this. He wants his father dead so that he can get what's his, right? Now, in that culture, appearances and honor is everything. It's brought a tremendous amount of shame to the family. We already know from the story the father has 2 sons, so he's been blessed by God to have 2 sons to pass down his inheritance to. He has animals. He has servants. He's wealthy. He has land. These are all things, even today, that can communicate success, right? So we know in the story that this father is someone who's esteemed, that's looked up to, because he has all of these things. Yet the son asks for his inheritance. He doesn't want anything to do with him. He wishes his father were dead, and so he brings shame upon his family. Not only that, he brings shame upon the family in the way that he uses his inheritance. Some of you may be thinking that, how does this relate to me? Well, I often think that the questions that we ask of God or even ourselves tend to reveal the nature of our heart or the position of our heart. And with the son asking for his inheritance, wanting to be on your own, wanting independence, wanting to do your own thing isn't a bad thing at all. That's actually the natural evolution of someone growing up and being their own person and taking on responsibility for themselves. But then asking for the inheritance displayed the true intention of his heart. He was selfish, he was greedy, he was impatient, didn't want to do things in the way that they should have been done, but he wanted to do it his own way. And not only that, he didn't care about what it communicated about his father or the shame that brought onto his family. He even left afterwards. Once he got all of his possessions together, he left, not to deal with the shame that brought to his family and the existing shame, because small communities like that, everyone knows everyone knows everything, and people don't forget. Once shamed in the family and the culture like that, always. Let's read a parallel story, something I want to kind of aim at here a little bit, in Luke 18 through 30. A certain ruler asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you call me good?" Jesus answered. No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother. All of these I have kept since I was a boy, he said. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, you still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. When he heard this, he became very sad because he was very wealthy. So what do we know from this story? Well, the title of the story is The Rich Young Ruler. 3 things that are still idolized in our culture today. Youth. Turn on any screen. What does it scream? It's good to be young and free. Any music lyric, young is in there probably. So we idolize youth and vitality in our culture. He's rich. That still communicates to today, right? So it's good to be rich, is what our world says. And then he's a ruler, so he has power, he has dominion, right? So these are all things that we would still say that the world communicates as valuable. Well, he's obviously a smart guy. He's asking Jesus a question that is a good question. How do I inherit eternal life? And on the surface, you might think, oh, that's a good question. That's someone who's wanting to know the heart of Jesus. And Jesus, being Jesus, asks more questions because he knows that the questions that we ask God and the questions we ask ourselves reveal the position of our heart. The rich young ruler had already had everything on this earth settled up. He had his youth, he had money, he had power. He checked all the boxes. He has a life of comfort. He didn't have anything else to worry about except what happens to me after I die. I need that box checked. Jesus kept probing and asking, and it revealed the true intention of his heart because he had made the main thing in his life his riches. All the things that other people looked at him, the identifiers, that is who he was. And it was impossible for him to give that up. I had a pastor once communicated back in the day, I heard him say that it's much like building blocks. You can imagine even like the old school ones, that like the fake brick ones back in the day that were cardboard that you can build a castle out of or something like that. And in our life, we have all these bricks or all these boxes that make up our life, and it's our identities, right? And you're a father, a son, a mother, a daughter, a brother, sister, your job, your occupation, what you do, what you enjoy. And the more important this identity is, the bigger the box is, and the more we stack on top of it. And in our life, what should be the main thing? Our relationship with Christ, the grace that we receive from him. That should be the biggest box, and everything else should be stacked on top of that. But what this rich young ruler had done, and what we also do often, is we make the thing in our lives that the world communicates as the most important the biggest box. And when that box is taken away, everything else tumbles and falls because you have to remove the biggest one. Another thing is I grew up, my mom always saying, hold everything with an open hand. And as a teenager, that you kind of just confused about what this means because you're not thinking long-term. And unfortunately, young kids, we don't often think long-term when it comes to stuff like this. But hold everything with an open hand. What does that mean? The desires that you want, the things that you want, the passions of your heart, the things that you're asking for God, or even the things that you want in this life, ask for it with an open hand so that you can receive it, but then keep that hand open so that any time if the Lord decides to take it out, that it's not ripping it out of your hand. It's not that thing that you have to clutch. There's only one thing in the whole world that can be clutched, and it's a good thing, and that's our Father's love for us. It says that no one can pry us out of our Father's hands. This is an important thing to parallel. God can hold us, and he can clutch us close, and nobody can tear that away. But when it comes to our lives, what did Jesus say? He said it best. I came to serve, not to be served. Pick up your cross daily. Follow me. Sacrifice of yourself. I came to serve, not to be served. Have this life that you hold with an open hand, because I'm willing to give, but also things may be taken away as well. And this is something valuable. This is something that the rich young ruler could not understand. What's the position of your heart? 2019 might have been a very difficult year for you. I don't know where you're at today, but you could be asking God the question, why? How did I get here? And maybe it's not of your own doing. Maybe just things happen. And you still have that question, why? Brings up memories and parallels of in Psalms. The psalmist writes, and he's shaking his fists, and you can almost visualize it. God, where are you? Awake from your slumber. I'm surrounded by my enemies. They're caving in left and right. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and the disciples are in the boat with Jesus, and he's asleep. Jesus, wake from your slumber. Wake up. Don't you see the storm around? And all Jesus does, and all he says is, quiet, be still. Right? So what are we putting at the base? What is our block? When you're thinking about 2019, what is it that you can glean from it? And maybe some of you are really looking forward to 2020 because it means the end of 2019. This is the main point of our message today. It's this. If we don't protect our heart with the grace of Christ and our faith in him, our flesh will sell us out to the world. You need to understand that grace is covering you. God's grace has covered you. It's done. All right? So whatever you've done, whatever you will do, God's grace is there. It's complete. It's finished. He said it best when he died on the cross. It is finished. My grace is enough for you. Now go and live in faith, knowing that you are covered and God's called you for a specific purpose, and live that out. Because your flesh so quickly wants to sell you out to the things that the world will tell you that are important. Money, riches, wealth, fame, anything and everything. You fill in the blank. You know what it is for you. If we don't protect our heart with the grace of Christ, our faith in him, our flesh will sell us out to the world. Let's look back at our story. I'm going to read the father's reaction to the son coming home. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." This would be a very normal response in our day and age. If you can think about a father in here, and you have a son out and making all sorts of bad decisions, and he's in a really tough spot and situation, and he decides to come home to be restored, to brought back to rightness and fullness, and a natural response to be one of embrace. And it says in the passage that the father saw him from a long distance, meaning he was looking for him, and then he raced to him. One of those detailed brushstrokes here that we may miss. In that day and age, in first century, if you're a first century Jew, and if you're a man, a dignified man over 25 years old, men do not run. It is shameful to run. Because what do you have to do when you run? You have to gird your robe, tuck it in, and bare your legs. This is only something that's done by young men, by teenagers, boys who run and play, or people who maybe have to do labor as their job, right? And so it's not a dignified thing to do back in that day and age. So fathers don't run. So first, the son brings shame upon his family by saying, "I wish you were dead. Now give me what's due mine." And then he goes and squanders it. Doesn't come back with more, doesn't invest wisely and bring back more money for the community to enjoy, but no, he squanders it and comes back empty-handed, requiring more resources. And not only that, but then the father, doesn't matter, that shame that you brought on, I'm still going to embrace you, I'm still going to love you. Not only that, but I'm going to shame myself so as to go to you. And now you start seeing some parallels here between our Christ taking on our shame on the cross, running to the cross on our behalf. There might be another reason why the Father is running here as well. And I took this from, I mentioned him earlier, Dr. Kenneth Baker. We're going to look at a section of his book. It says, first century Jewish custom dictated that if a Jewish boy lost the family inheritance among the Gentiles and dared to return home, the community would break a large pot in front of him and cry out, "So-and-so is cut off from his people." The ceremony was called kazaza, literally meaning the cutting off. After it was performed, the community would have nothing to do with the wayward person by selling his inheritance and taking it with him. The prodigal son takes a huge risk. If he loses that money among the Gentile, he burns his bridges and has no way to return home. He has no more rights to claim, and no one will take him in. So not only did the father shame himself by baring his legs and running to his son off in the distance, but he knew, in that day and age, the community, if they saw who was coming back to their town, they were going to kazaza him. How many of you want to kazaza somebody out of your life right now? You might have a couple people in here reading. Just go up to them and say kazaza and like drop a pin or something. You don't break a vase, something valuable. No, but what does this say? Our God is a God that who wants to intercede on behalf of us. This community is coming, and they're going to make this prodigal son cut off from them forever. Once this happens, it's done. And the Father, now, when this longing embrace, when this hug becomes so much more than just a hug, but it's protection. And this is supposed to mirror what our Father does for us as well. When he takes on our shame, when he takes on our guilt, he wants to intercede for us, protect us from what the world would say. Now, if you're a first century Jew, this is where the story might also take a different turn because you're starting to put some puzzle pieces together. See, if you're a first century Jew, then you've been told audibly and for generations of the stories of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the prophets that talk about the Messiah that's going to come, the temple that's going to be rebuilt, the king that's going to reign and bring Israel back to its rightful place as rulers with God in the earth, right? And so this is what they've been waiting for, right? Because God's been silent up until Jesus comes on the map, and now God's speaking again. And so the people are in wait and anticipation. And so if they're hearing this for the first time, this parable, they're starting to say, Jesus is talking about Israel in the Old Testament, constantly going after other gods. What was Israel saying in the Old Testament? God, we wish you were dead. We want this God instead. We want kings, because that's how the rest of the world leads, is by kings. So God grants that wish, and he allows Israel to take that journey, always waiting, looking in distance for Israel to come back. And so there's this other detailed brushstroke that Jesus is painting this giant picture of saying, not only is this supposed to be emblematic of our life and our journey with Christ, but also Israel's journey with Christ. Now, we get to know something that they didn't know because they were expecting physical king, physical Messiah, physical ruler, rebuild the temple, destroy the Romans, the Roman Empire, which they were under rule at that time. But now we get to know the end of the story. Jesus came in on a donkey, not on a chariot. He was the sacrifice, and now we have become the temple. He didn't rebuild a temple. Now we are the temple. We have the Holy Spirit inside of us, and we get to go out and be the kingdom doers of his kingdom. His kingdom now is for everyone, not just Jews, but Gentiles as well, and it covers the earth. And so you can now see Jesus is really, really going the distance with this painting here of trying to convey the message in this parable. You know, and oftentimes we may think that just running away from God looks like doing the utmost worst that you can do, right? The craziest sin, the most astronomical thing that you can think of, the worst thing that you can think of, this is what running away looks like. But I also want to encourage you to think of it this way, that it could be just not fulfilling something that God has called you to, but running away from a calling that God has on your life. And maybe not even a calling, it could be an instant, it could be a moment. My moment was 3 years ago in July. Ed was right, I've been in youth ministry for 10 years, but I've really only been pursuing that as a calling for the past 2 or 3. For whatever reason, I had this fear of being tied down to one thing. I don't know why. I have kind of an adventurous spirit, and I always just had this fear of if I landed on one thing, and then I wouldn't be able to do anything, right? And I would be stuck to doing this one thing. And also, growing up, ever since I was a young kid, my dad has always told me that he sees God's calling on my life as a youth pastor, ever since I was very little. Now, who in here wants to do the thing that their dad tells them to do at a young age? Sorry, Dad, but you don't. And I tried anything and everything. I wanted to do every other thing. So I went on adventures. Went around the world, around the U.S. Sports didn't play out for me. And so then I was back to square one. What do I do? And I had been doing youth ministry and volunteering, and I kind of checked that box mentally, like, okay, well, I'm doing it, so here you go. Then this happened. July 2016. I was headed in wine country in Temecula. I don't know if anyone been there. I used to live there, and it was on a back country road, 1 lane each way, and a drunk driver had passed out behind the wheel, and they were going 55 miles an hour, and I was going 45, 50 miles an hour, and coming around a blind turn, and they were in my lane, and we just collided. I woke up in the hospital. Riley was there, my wife. I don't know where she. Oh, there she is. She was there and woke me up. And we were just telling someone earlier. I had no idea. They nicknamed me 10-second Tom in the hospital because I couldn't retain information beyond 10 seconds. I had a horrible concussion and a broken wrist. But they nicknamed me 10-second Tom, and she walks, and I see her, and she's bawling her eyes out. And I said, "Why are you crying?" And she tells me what happened, and I look around like, "Look, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me." And I lift up my arm, still broken, hadn't been worked on, so it's like hanging down here, and I look at it and scream, and put it back down. Doctor after doctor after doctor told me, you shouldn't be alive, let alone you shouldn't be walking, let alone you shouldn't be talking, functioning, brain things, all that stuff up there. I went to the paramedics headquarters with my dad to pick up paperwork for legal documents or whatever to show my transfer papers from where they picked me up at the scene to the hospital. And I was asking the guy behind the counter to pull up those papers for me, and he was kind of reading through. They have their own language, shorthand language in the paramedic field, and so he was kind of reading it through and telling me what it meant. And then you kind of just saw him reading and then looking up at me, and he saw me in the sling. He's like, "Wait, is this you? Like, this is you?" And, yeah. This was like, how long ago? This wasn't that long ago. How are you walking? How are you alive? I've been doing this for 30 years. If I read this right here, this means you're dead. I don't know why. God gave me that opportunity to fulfill my calling and to walk into that. So it doesn't always look like someone who's just on a bender going crazy. But what is it that God's called you to? What is it that you need to fulfill in your life that God has placed in you for a specific reason? Are you running from it? Again, so I don't know what 2019 was like for you, but you should know, you need to know that God is a God that's constantly looking on the horizon, waiting for his children to come home to him, constantly waiting to embrace them, to protect them, to take on shame for them, for us. If we don't protect our heart with the grace of Christ and our faith in him, our flesh will sell us out to the world. Let's look at a story again, and look at the older son's response to this whole thing happening in verses 25 to 31. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field when he came near the house. He heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come home," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became very angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you were always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because of this brother of yours that was dead is alive again. He was lost and is found." Maybe you're someone here today, and for a lack of a better way to put it, you've been checking all the boxes. This year was filled of you doing everything right, and you don't know why you're in the position that you're in. You've been following God, you've been praying, you've been doing all the things, and still yet you see other people around you that maybe don't deserve the things that they get, but they get it anyway. And I would encourage you to look at the questions that this brother had. It shows the position of his heart. Right? Because it's a good thing to do all the things that he did, to work for his dad, to never gripe or complain, to obey God, to love God. Those are good things. But then I wonder what point of that journey he stopped letting the grace of God and his faith in God protect his heart, and he started letting the outside forces of the world overtake. And that question, when did I get my fattened calf, starts showing the position of his heart. One is greedy, wants what he wants, is impatient, not trusting in God. Maybe you're the person that's wanting to cut someone out of your life right now. Maybe there is a bridge that needs to be mended, and you can mend that. You can be the compassionate father in this story. And you can go out and take on shame in order to mend that bridge. You can be the advocate for somebody to protect them from the community around. This is a calling just as much as it is to know what it is that God's called you to do. to treat our fellow brother with love and grace and the grace that we've received from God. Whenever someone says, like, I feel like I could do this stuff, but I just don't have anything to give. Like, I don't have any skills or talents or anything that I could provide, or like, what am I supposed to do? It always makes me think of my grandma, Grandma Betty Jean. She died over about 10 years ago. Sweetest lady that you ever met, born and raised in Alabama. I wouldn't do her accent justice if I tried to do it, but she had the thickest Southern accent, and it always just melted your heart when you talked to her. She always smelled like cherry chapstick. She always used cherry chapstick, and you hug her, and she had that smell on her, and she loved she loved to give hugs, and she was an incredible cook. Well, at her funeral, the reception of the funeral, all of the grandkids and nephews and everyone were saying things that we remembered about her and things that we loved about her. And then we opened it up for people that weren't family to start standing up and sharing. Now, my grandparents, they didn't grow up rich. They weren't super famous. They lived modest lives. She was a stay-at-home mom. She wasn't an Instagram influencer. She didn't have Facebook. She didn't go trending on Twitter or YouTube. But what she did, and I learned, and it was this beautiful thing, person after person would stand up that I had never met before in my life. Betty Jean used to make lunches for us as kids when we were little because we were poor and we couldn't afford it. And she knew that that was something that she could do to help us. And then it was like a wave. One person stood up, and then another, and then another, and then another. And there was just this beautiful ripple effect of this life that you think is something because of what the world communicates as valuable. And then to see her tree branch of love, if you will, and all the people that she had affected just by being her. She lived in that grace. God covered her. She was forgiven. Now she lived in faith, going and being the light, being that mobile temple where God resides and enacting being a kingdom mover for God in his now earth-wide, universe-wide kingdom. And so when people tell me, I don't have anything to give, yes, you do. You have everything to give. Because what does God say? I did not come to serve. I did not come to be served. I came to serve. This life I give up. I take up my cross to follow Christ daily. This world would have you think that you are here to be served, to be made comfortable. Those aren't bad things, but that's not the purpose. The purpose is to live a life for Christ, to live in communion with Christ, to love others for Christ. If we don't protect our heart with the grace of Christ and our faith in him, our flesh will sell us out to the world. I hope and pray for you that 2020, for those of you who are going through a hard time, that it is a story of new beginnings. And maybe you're here today and you need that. Maybe you need prayer. Maybe you need just someone to talk to about this horrible year that 2019 was, and you need to start on a new walk with Christ. Maybe it is a little bit of reflecting of what's the position of my heart. What are the questions I've been asking God that shows the positions of my heart? Can I say that I've been protecting my heart with the grace of Christ and my faith in him? Let's pray.